Hey there, Legal Tea listeners. This is your host, Jenny Roselle. Today we're on the estate planning of the rich and famous topic, and for today's episode, we're going to be diving into someone that very recently passed away, and it came out of the blue. Stephen "tWitch" Boss is who today's episode is on. Now, if you remember, last celebrity estate planning episode was on Lisa Marie Presley, who also passed away very recently and also somewhat surprisingly. So sadly, that's the case here with tWitch as well. And speaking of that, Stephen "tWitch" Boss informally went by tWitch. So from here on out, let's just call him that. Let's call him tWitch. tWitch is likely best known for being the DJ on the Ellen DeGeneres show. She, like every episode, would talk to him and his big smile would light up the room. He wasn't really a co-host necessarily with Ellen, but they definitely went back and forth a lot in her episodes. tWitch was also well known for being a dancer, and he participated in the TV show So You Think You Can Dance. And it was through his dancing career that he met his wife, Allison Holker. Sadly, very, very sadly, tWitch passed away from suicide. And many celebrities and friends of tWitch came out with the general message of that, even though tWitch brought a lot of light into this world, he, like so many, faced really deep internal struggles. tWitch took his own life on December 13th, 2022 at the age of 40 years old. Now, one of the celebrities that released a message about tWitch was none other than Justin Timberlake. And after reading a lot of other celebrity statements like Michelle Obama, Ciara, Viola Davis, Ellen DeGeneres herself, Jennifer Hudson, Alicia Keys, a lot of people came out and kind of gave a supportive message to Allison, their kids, and tWitch. And I really think, I bring up Justin Timberlake because I really think that Justin's probably, beautifully captured like everyone's statements, maybe the best. And he said, quote, "It's heartbreaking to hear that someone who brought so much joy to a room was hurting so much behind closed doors. I've known tWitch for over 20 years through the dance community. He always lit everything up. You just never know what someone is really going through. Take care of yourselves. Love that human in the mirror. Check on your people. Sending light to his beautiful family in this dark, confusing time. You will be missed, sir. Rest easy." End quote. It seems like quite an appropriate time to mention also what Michelle Obama said in her message, which is that if you are struggling and need someone to talk to, please remember that you're not alone. You're never alone. And there's always someone willing and really able to talk through those thoughts with you. You can call or text the Suicide and Crisis Hotline by dialing 988 or by going to 988lifeline.org. Before we dive into what is going on estate-wise following tWitch's tragic passing, let's talk a little bit more about him as a person. So we know he was married to Allison Holker, a fellow dancer. Prior to her marriage to tWitch, Allison had a daughter, Wesley, who tWitch ended up adopting. And together, tWitch and Allison had two children named Maddox and Zaya. So therefore, they had three children, Wesley, Maddox, and Zaya. Now, professionally speaking, tWitch, like I said, was most known for being the DJ on the Ellen DeGeneres show. He started on the show in April 2014, and then in August 2020, he was made a co-executive producer of the show until the show came to a historic end in May 22. And after the show started I mean, it's worthy to note that it started way back in September 2003. After Twitch's passing, it was discovered he did not have any type of will, trust, or estate plan at all. Because he did not have a will, according to People magazine, who had obtained filings with the California court for Twitch's estate would go by the California estate rules. Sadly, because we've had so many celebrities here on Legal Tea that pass away without any type of estate plan, if you're a faithful Legal Tea listener, you sure know what the rules that, often govern in these situations that are called the intestacy rules. Though in case you're a newbie listener, intestacy rules are in place for individuals who die without a will. They're sort of a built-in estate plan that the state creates, which, doesn't sound too great, huh? And your hunch, if that's kind of what you're thinking, your hunch is accurate, because the rather strange thing about these intestacy rules is that they're not really intuitive. And what I mean by that is many people think, if I die, everything will go to my spouse. But a lot of states, including here in Indiana, where this podcast is based from, the intestacy rules say that half the estate goes to your spouse, half goes to kids. So, really important to note here that from my research, California must do things a tad different, which is not incredibly surprising to me. I say this because none of the articles I read, and trust me, I read a lot of them, none of them I read really talked about Allison having to open an estate. Instead, if you really read articles about what's going on and pay attention to the wording, it's not that at all. So let me talk about what she has filed with the California court so far. In the filings with the California court for Twitch's estate, Allison filed a petition called a spousal property petition, which, according to a People magazine, sort of just confirms with the court that the spouse is really the spouse, and that such spouse is entitled to their, interest in their deceased spouse's estate. Which to me makes me so sad, because we have Allison, of course, that has to be in this state of complete and utter sadness. And not only sadness, but she has to be the glue that's holding her family together, right? So not only is she carrying this immense amount of sadness, but now she's having to go through all this legal gobbledygook, basically so the court counts her as Twitch's spouse, so that she can have access to his estate and assets. And that may sound crazy, but it's the law. And like I tell so many clients, I don't write the laws, I just make sure my clients follow them. So while this seems so crazy, and perhaps, dare I say, a little silly or stupid, for her to have to go through what she's going through, the state requires it. And there's probably reasonable justification for having these laws in place too, honestly. But to anchor back to these intestacy rules that I brought up, as well as the spousal property petition that I was just blabbing about, it is sounding like she is not needing to go through any sort of probate estate administration process, which would be when the intestacy rules would be governing. Instead, through a lot of article readings and kind of gathering what's going on in California, my educated guess, and I'm not licensed in California, so I'm just not sure of their sort of normal estate proceedings and what they look like. But my educated guess is that this spousal property petition is sort of just a customary and normal thing that gets done. And I actually kind of remember a few articles, I think, mentioning that this is just commonly done in these type of fact scenarios. As I interpret these articles, ultimately, all of Twitch's assets will likely end up in Allison's hands, which of course is good news, right? But here in Indiana, if Twitch's assets were in his name alone and he died without a will, like I said, half of those assets would go to Allison and half would go to his kids. Though Indiana, as much as I can tell, that's not what's going on in California. Like what would happen here in Indiana is not what's going on in California. So this spousal property petition got filed to prove that Allison was Twitch's spouse, and then upon approval, Twitch's assets would go to Allison. Now, the source of this difference in like how here in Indiana versus California, the source of this difference is how California is handling the Twitch's assets is likely because California is considered to be what is called a community property state. Now, you may be thinking, what the heck does that mean? Well, there are less than 10 states in the U.S. that are considered to be community property states. And if you care to know which ones they are, California, of course, is one. Arizona, Idaho, Louisiana, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin. And that's according to Investopedia. So what is a community property state? Well, according to American College of Trust and Estate Counsel, community property is as follows. Quote, community property means that spouses who acquire property during marriage own property equally, like 50-50. That means that one spouse on death can leave his or her share as he or she wants, end quote. So on top of this, it's important to note that even though this is the law for community property states, that things like, something like a premarital agreement or informally called a prenup, those can alter what I just said. They can alter the distribution pattern in cases of death or divorce. In Allison's spousal property petition, she actually confirmed for us that there was not a prenup in place. So because of that and what we know about community property states and specifically what they are, that makes a lot more sense why Indiana, which is not a community property state, and California are different in how they'd handle Twitch's estate. What all that means, what all I've been blabbing about, is that the spousal property petition that Allison filed is likely making the argument that 1, she is Twitch's rightful spouse, and 2, that she's entitled to his half of assets since community property states say that they each own a half. It took a lot of time to get here and really understand why and how things have been working the way they have and are with Twitch's estate. Initially, I was like, wait, he didn't have a will. Why are they not talking about intestacy rules and probate and estate administration? Well, the quick answer is that California just operates differently than other states, and really, it essentially anchors back to California being one of the few states that remain, which are considered to be community property states. Interesting, right? It's such a classic example and case that every state has different laws and how they do stuff. Even in my little estate and elder law world, every state may operate differently. The quick takeaway from Twitch's estate is that had he had any more planning in place, likely through some type of trust, Allison, his wife, probably would not have had to go through the legal process that she's going through. And as I said before in this episode, it makes me really sad that Allison has to be in this state of sadness and be the one that's holding the family together. And now she's having to go through all this legal gobbledygook, which likely could have been totally avoidable with a little estate planning, even in California, a community property state. Speaking of this, especially since I talked a lot today about how, different states operate differently, that sort of thing. If anyone ever needs a solid estate and elder law attorney referral, I'm part of an awesome national organization of estate and elder law attorneys, and I'd be happy to get you a name of someone in your state. So just because I talk a lot about Indiana, generally speaking, on here, and I talked a lot about California, if you ever need a referral, just reach out, legaltpodcast@gmail.com. Alrighty, I think we're ready to wrap this episode up. Next week, we are back to a cautionary tale where we talk about real-life clients, real-life cases that I or my office have worked on. And during that episode, we're going to be talking about a subject that may hit home to some of my Legal Tea listeners. But even if it doesn't, it's it's good. It will be good to know and to listen in case it does ever impact you or a loved one. And next week's episode is going to talk about estate planning involving someone or a beneficiary with addiction issues. And, estate planning in these kind of situations requires such careful planning and tough conversations, honestly. But if you don't plan well, there could be really severe repercussions, which we'll get into next time. So tune in for that next week. But until then, Legal Tea listeners, take care and be well.